Hello everyone, welcome to EconomicStory-Channel. Let's dive into today's topic. In the conclusion of our previous podcast, we explored Adam Smith's idea of the market's self-regulation in creating economic order and efficiency. However, as mentioned, markets have their limits. Let's continue exploring to better understand the complexity of economic systems and the role of government intervention in markets. Adam Smith was never dogmatic. He knew markets aren't perfect, as they cannot enforce laws, protect borders, or provide public services. Take street cleaning, for example. Everyone wants clean streets, but no one is motivated to do it themselves. For this reason, Adam Smith believed the government should support industries related to warfare to prepare for conflicts, protect workers, control diseases, issue patents, safeguard emerging industries until they're strong enough, regulate banks to ensure honesty, and establish education standards. The goal is to prevent jobs, like those in the pen workshop we discussed previously, from turning workers into mere automatons. The government must also provide community recreational activities, cap interest rates, and address many other issues. Capping interest rates is a key idea, as Smith understood that excessive rewards lead investors to ignore risks. To illustrate, consider a town with 3 companies seeking investment. Company A needs capital for a safe farm project with a 4% return. Company B requires funds for a risky trade voyage to Asia, offering an 8% return. Company C seeks investment for an extremely risky moon gold mining project, promising a 300% return. Investors, ignoring risks, pour money into Company C's project. This issue isn't rare, especially in the 4.0 era, where large rewards obscure risk concerns. Investors focus solely on profits, neglecting potential failures, leading to loss of control and unpreparedness for setbacks. When interest rates are capped, Smith expected people to accept reasonable risks and avoid high-risk ventures. He didn't just advocate for low interest rates, but also believed excessive profits are harmful. High profits and high wages cannot coexist, as workers' wages are often the capitalist's profit. High wages benefit not only workers, but society as a whole, since most people are workers. This remains true today. If your income comes from your labor, not rent or profits, you're a worker. No society thrives if most workers are poor. When capitalists pursue personal gain and pay low wages, it harms society. Similarly, when they raise prices, workers' real wages by less than before. In other words, workers must pay more for the same goods. High prices and low wages have been issues for centuries and may persist. This is why Adam Smith favored free markets. He believed the free and competitive market is the foundation for economic development. According to Smith, competition among capitalists optimizes efficiency and pricing in business. In a free market, capitalists compete to attract and retain talented workers, offering attractive wages and benefits to motivate them. This increases wages. When multiple capitalists offer the same product or service, customers have choices. To win customer favor, capitalists must optimize prices and stay competitive, leading to lower prices. Competition over wages and prices creates a dynamic market, encouraging growth and innovation across industries. This improves quality of life and benefits both consumers and workers. However, even in Smith's time, large capitalists could evade market competition. They could monopolize markets. Capitalists in the same trade rarely meet, even for leisure, but when they do, their discussions often end in schemes to manipulate markets or raise prices. Worse, powerful capitalists wield political influence to push for laws, subsidies, and tariffs to secure profits. This is the mercantilism we explored in a previous podcast, an economic system designed to generate profits through trade. In Smith's era, few understood that these laws harm society. Workers were overworked and undereducated, and even governments were misled. Historically, governments and society didn't fully recognize the negative impacts of capitalists' opaque and unfair actions. This allowed capitalists to exploit ignorance for personal gain. Adam Smith emphasized that when capitalists propose new trade laws or regulations, We must be cautious and scrutinize them carefully, not accepting them outright. Capitalist interests often differ from the public's. They frequently benefit from deceiving and oppressing the public, and they've done so many times. Our journey across the English Channel to explore Adam Smith has partly answered why England was wealthier than France, despite France's triple population. The truth is, England's economy was freer than France's, and Smith saw this as the main reason. Yet, with subsidies, protective tariffs, and government-imposed monopolies, this remains complex. Monopolies occur when one seller dominates a market without competition. Monopoly holders control prices, raising them for higher profits, leading to higher consumer costs and limited choices. For example, in Smith's time, only Britain's giant East India Company was allowed to trade with Asia, particularly India. Established in 1600, the East India Company was a major government intervention in the market. It was a government-chartered corporation. Before tech giants like Google, Apple, or Amazon, the East India Company was one of history's most powerful corporations. Though dissolved over a century ago, its influence still shapes modern global business operations. British merchants also received legal monopolies in trade with Britain's American colonies. This brought high profits for merchants, but British and American consumers paid high prices and taxes to enforce these laws. With monopolies or trade privileges without competition, consumer choices were limited. They had few options for goods or services, and suppliers could significantly raise prices, impacting their wallets. It's well known that Britain imposed harsh taxes and economic policies on its American colonies. These taxes increased financial burdens on Americans. Growing opposition arose as Americans felt Britain's government was exploiting them through authoritarian measures. To them, taxation without representation was tyranny. This discontent fueled protests, notably the Boston Tea Party, a bold act against the Tea Act passed by British Parliament in May 1773. Americans realized why distant kings, queens, and aristocrats could impose excessive taxes on them. They resisted, and this message spread widely. Dumping the East India Company's tea made American colonists feel liberated. The Boston Tea Party sparked the fight against British rule in 1775. Ultimately, on July 4, 1776, America's founding fathers issued the Declaration of Independence, marking the official birth of the United States, no longer a British colony. After the American Revolution and independence in 1776, the U.S. began building infrastructure to develop its economy and shape its future. During this journey, a significant work appeared in 1798, Thomas Robert Malthus's An Essay on the Principle of Population. This work examined the relationship between population and resources, arguing that population growth would outstrip natural resources. Malthus noted that populations tend to double every few decades, growing exponentially, while food supplies grow linearly. He predicted that population booms would lead to resource scarcity and social crisis, particularly famine. Malthus was correct that infinite population growth is unsustainable on a finite planet. He warned that population growth would exceed resource supply, causing social inequality. However, Malthus's views faced criticism from economists and policymakers. They argued his ideas lacked scientific rigor, failing to account for technological progress, changes in production and distribution, and public policy impacts. Following debates over Malthus's work, his friend, British economist David Ricardo, published Principles of Political Economy and Taxation in 1817, considered a cornerstone of classical economics. Ricardo's work was highly regarded for its scientific rigor and deep analysis. He explored not only population growth, but also labor value, comparative advantage, and taxation's role. Ricardo simplified the concept of money. For him, goods are exchanged based on the labor required to produce them. Buying an axe or any item is essentially trading labor effort. To explain simply, suppose you have an axe. Per Ricardo, its value comes not just from materials, but from labor. For example, creating an axe requires one person mining iron for an hour, another mining coal for an hour, a third forging the axe for an hour. and the fourth transporting it to market for 15 minutes. Here, the Smith's hour is worth 2 miner's hours due to training time. Totaling 4 hours and 15 minutes, the axe's value equals the gold produced by a gold miner and jeweler in that time. Ricardo also proposed how economies function. He believed people act as economic men, prioritizing personal gain without regard for others, always seeking more. Based on this, Ricardo created simplified models of economic operations, like an idealized version of the real economy where everything is perfect. One model focused on Adam Smith's free market, where people freely buy and sell with minimal government intervention. Ricardo took Smith's ideas and made them more abstract, creating idealized free market models where everything works perfectly without real-world complexities. In his model, Ricardo considered only 2 countries, England and Portugal, and 2 products, wine and cloth. First, assume an English worker produces 2 barrels of wine or 4 suits of cloth yearly, while a Portuguese worker produces 4 barrels of wine or 2 suits. Ideally, each nation specializes in its more efficient product in trades. England makes cloth, Portugal makes wine, and they exchange. In a second scenario, suppose Portugal improves productivity, with 1 worker producing 4 barrels of wine or 6 suits yearly, while England's output remains unchanged. Portuguese workers might say they don't need trade since they produce faster. English workers, fearing cheaper Portuguese goods will ruin their economy, question trade's value. By common sense, trade seems illogical. Yet Ricardo suggested England focus on cloth and Portugal on wine. England buys wine from Portugal, and Portugal buys cloth from England. For example, if England shifts 100 workers from wine to cloth, they lose 200 barrels of wine but gain 400 suits yearly. Portugal shifts 60 workers from cloth to wine, losing 360 suits but gaining 240 barrels. The total output is 240 barrels of wine and 400 suits. England buys 220 barrels from Portugal, and Portugal buys 380 suits from England. Both nations gain 20 barrels and 20 suits, benefiting from cooperation. Compare this to self-production. If England splits 100 workers, they produce 100 barrels and 200 suits. Portugal, splitting 60 workers, produces 120 barrels and 180 suits. The total is 220 barrels and 380 suits, less than with specialization. Ricardo's key insight is that even if one nation is less efficient at producing goods, it can benefit by specializing in what it does best and trading with others. Through free trade and specialization, nations gain more of what they need or want, even if they aren't the best producers. Ricardo's abstract approaches were highly influential and widely accepted in economics, known as classical political economy. Adam Smith, also a classical economist, took a different approach, focusing on real-world observations, like how butchers and bakers make decisions. Smith's focus was understanding how people and businesses interact in reality, not abstract theories. Simply put, Ricardo shaped economic thought while Smith observed reality. Classical political economy suited academia, emphasizing government and political institutions' roles in managing economies and societies. In the early 19th century, economics shifted toward academia, becoming more complex with rigorous models and advanced theories. However, Ricardo's models have practical limitations. What stops British capitalists from moving operations to Portugal, leaving English workers jobless? If transporting goods from Portugal to England costs more than profits, or if trade collapses, Portugal has wine but no cloth. The model works well in theory, but is uncertain in practice. Ricardo's theory is simple, clear, and useful for explaining basic international trade aspects. However, applying these principles cruelly can lead to dire consequences. At the time, Ricardo's models were so compelling that people forgot they described idealized, not real-world scenarios. In the early 19th century, economies and societies faced upheavals, and the Industrial Revolution was transforming everything. This podcast on the basics of classical economics ends here. We've explored the limitations of Adam Smith's and Ricardo's theories. In the next podcast, we'll dive into the first industrial revolution and its unexpected developments. It'll be exciting to learn why this revolution was a pivotal turning point in history. If you found this content helpful, please share it with those who need it, and don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to support Economic Story Channel and help it reach more people. Thank you, and see you next time.